Yerrick Vaugh, a 20-year-old who found his refuge in the wild, embarked on a 2-week expedition into the rugged Trinity Alps, then vanished without a trace. For half a decade, the only lead was a vague sighting of him with a mysterious man, a detail that led nowhere and left the case cold. 5 years later, 2 hunters miles from any trail discovered his buried clothing. And inside the bundle, a heavy iron mechanism whose disturbing design would reveal a truth much darker than the wilderness itself. This is just the beginning of the mystery. Like this video if you want to see how it unfolds, hit that subscribe button if you're into true crime mysteries. The Trinity Alps wilderness does not simply tolerate visitors, it tests them. By August 22, 2005, the vast expanse of Northern California granite and dense forest seemed to have swallowed Yerrick Vaugh whole. He was 4 days overdue. For his mother, Era Vaughan, the silence radiating from the mountains was becoming unbearable. Yerrick had planned a rigorous 2-week solo expedition, a journey deep into the heart of the Alps. But the agreed-upon return date of August 18 had come and gone without a phone call, without a message, without any sign of her 20-year-old son. Era contacted the Trinity County Sheriff's Office, her voice tight with a controlled panic that only a mother facing the unknown can possess. She explained that this wasn't just a casual camping trip. Yerrick was different from most young men his age. He wasn't drawn to city life or conventional paths. He was drawn to the raw, unfiltered reality of the wilderness. Investigators began piecing together a portrait of the missing man. Yerrick Vaughan was exceptionally experienced, possessing a level of self-reliance that bordered on intense solitude. This independence was hard-earned. Yerrick's father had died when he was very young, leaving Yerrick and Era to navigate the world together. While they were close, Yerrick found his refuge, his Recapio Creative. Daily YouTube recaps in your inbox. Stop listening for hours. Start reading in minutes. Every morning at 8 a.m., our AI-powered digest lands in your inbox with all key insights from your favorite YouTube channels. Start your daily recaps. Sponsored. Way of processing stress and grief in nature. The more challenging the environment, the more comfortable he seemed. Hara understood this need. She often hiked with him, driven by a lingering maternal worry, despite his obvious competence. But Yerrick frequently preferred to go alone. He relished the solitude, the complete immersion in the mountains, where the only sounds were the wind and the water. This trip to the Trinity Alps was significant. It was intended as a final major challenge, a capstone to his wilderness training before he embarked on an ambitious plan to travel the world solo. When speaking with the sheriff's office, Era emphasized Yerrick's routine. This was crucial context for why she hadn't reported him missing the moment he was late. Yerrick practiced a strict off-grid protocol. Once he entered the deep wilderness, he powered down all electronics. No cell phone, no GPS beacon, nothing that could tether him to the world he was trying to escape. This intentional disconnection, a standard practice for him, initially masked the seriousness of his absence. The first day overdue was explainable, perhaps a difficult pass or bad weather. Hit like if this story left you speechless, and subscribe for more mysteries that'll keep you up at night. In 1990, a teenage girl from Oregon vanished without a trace, leaving her mom and dad without answers for over 2 decades. But 22 years later, her father flips through an old school yearbook of hers. And what he notices in that moment changes everything. The fog rolled in from the Pacific Ocean, blanketing the coastal town of Mornington, Oregon, in its customary morning shroud. Frank Sanders stood at the window of his daughter's bedroom, watching as the mist swirled around the lighthouse point in the distance. The scenic beauty of this small town, with its thick woods and dramatic cliffs overlooking the ocean, had always been a source of comfort for him until 22 years ago when his daughter vanished without a trace. Frank turned away from the window, his eyes scanning the untouched bedroom. Everything was exactly as Alicia had left it that spring day in 1990, a few weeks after her high school graduation. Posters still clung to the walls. Her desk remained organized with textbooks and notebooks, her closet still full of clothes that hadn't been worn in over 2 decades. It's time, he whispered to himself, recalling the conversation he'd had with his wife Elaine the previous night. They had finally agreed that after 22 years, they needed to accept that Alicia was never coming back. Today was the day they would sort through her belongings, donate what could be useful to children in need, and move the rest to the attic. Frank opened the window to let in fresh air, immediately disturbing years of settled dust. He sneezed and wiped his eyes, then moved to the closet and began taking out Alicia's clothes. Each item brought back memories. Her favorite blue sweater, the dress she wore to her junior prom, the faded jeans with patches she had sewn on herself. He worked methodically, placing items in different boxes, one for donation, one for storage, one for keepsakes. When he reached her school supplies, he hesitated. These represented his daughter's aspirations, her future that never came to be. She had been accepted to the University of Oregon, planning to study marine biology. As Frank sorted through textbooks and binders, he came across a book he didn't recognize, Alicia's high school yearbook. Surprisingly, he realized he had never looked through it before. In those painful days after her disappearance, neither he nor Elaine could bear to see Alicia's smiling face captured in those pages, frozen in time with classmates who had gone on to live their lives. Frank sat on the edge of the bed and opened the yearbook. The weight of it in his hands felt significant, like he was holding a piece of his daughter's life that had remained unexplored. He flipped through the glossy pages until he found Alicia's senior portrait. Her smile, so bright and hopeful, sent a familiar jab of pain through his heart. 22 years, he whispered, running his finger over her face. I need to learn to keep you in my heart without this pain, sweetheart. His eyes drifted to the photo beside Alicia's, her best friend, Amy Davidson. Amy's face brought back memories of sleepovers, dinner at their table, the girls laughing and whispering secrets. Frank realized he hadn't heard anything about Amy in years. After Alicia disappeared, Amy had visited regularly for a few months, but eventually those visits stopped. Curious, Frank flipped to the section with individual student profiles. Each senior had a page with a short biography and personal quotes. He found Alicia's page and read her words written when she had her whole life ahead of her. Thanks to Mom and Dad for always believing in me. To my teachers who pushed me to do better, and to my best friend Amy. Don't forget to return my book, The Secret Garden, Illustrated Classic Edition. You old grandma, love you forever. Frank chuckled, the sound caught between sweetness and bitterness. The light-hearted jab at Amy was so typical of their friendship. He turned the page to find Amy's profile, reading about her dreams and aspirations. Her biography spoke about drive, following dreams, and standing up for yourself. Frank's mind returned to the book Alicia had mentioned. The Secret Garden had been her favorite since childhood. She had collected different editions of it. Had Amy ever returned it? He couldn't recall seeing it among Alicia's things. Driven by curiosity, Frank began searching through the boxes of Alicia's books. The dust in the room made his eyes water and his nose run, so he decided to take the boxes to the living room where he could breathe more easily. In the living room, he methodically emptied the boxes, arranging books and magazines on the coffee table and floor. There were fantasy novels, science textbooks, nature magazines, but no illustrated edition of The Secret Garden. Frank wondered if Amy still had it after all these years. On a whim, he checked the back of the yearbook and found a section where students had written their contact information. Amy had scribbled her phone number with a note. Call me anytime, BFF. Frank reached for his phone and dialed the number, not expecting it to still be in service after 22 years. As anticipated, the automated message informed him the number was no longer in use. Just then, the front door opened and Elaine walked in carrying grocery bags from the farmer's market. She stopped abruptly, taking in the scene of books and magazines scattered across their living room. Frank, what is all this? Her voice was sharp with surprise and something deeper. Pain. I was just going through Alicia's things like we planned, Frank explained, standing up. Elaine's face hardened. We agreed to sort and store her things, not spread them all over the house. I thought we were finally moving forward, not dwelling in the past again. I'm not dwelling, Elaine. I found her yearbook and was looking for something. What could possibly be so important? Elaine set her grocery bags on the kitchen counter, her movements stiff with anger. Frank showed her the yearbook, pointing to Alicia's note about the book. She mentioned a book that Amy borrowed. I was curious if it was among her things. Elaine sighed heavily. A book? Frank. It doesn't matter anymore. Alicia's books are just gathering dust. We shouldn't bother Amy with this. She's probably forgotten all about it, too. Do you know where Amy is now? Frank asked, changing the subject slightly. Yes, I see her sometimes when I'm in town. She lives in a camper these days, Elaine replied, beginning to unpack her groceries. I thought maybe I'd visit her, Frank said tentatively. Not just for the book, of course. It's been so long since we've seen her, and she was like family once. Elaine stopped what she was doing and turned to face him directly. Frank, I can't do that today. I don't have anything against Amy, but I'm not prepared to see her right now. Last night, we agreed to clean up and let go of hope. Going to see Amy today feels like the opposite of that. She gestured to the mess in the living room. I'll stay here and clean this up. Get things ready for the attic like we planned. If you want to go, that's your choice. Frank nodded. Understanding her reluctance, it was a spontaneous idea. I'll go alone. Elaine gave him directions to where Amy usually parked her camper, but warned, don't push her too hard, Frank. Alicia's disappearance must have hit her hard, too. They were like sisters. Frank gathered the yearbook, his phone, wallet, and car keys. As he headed for the door, he glanced back at Elaine, who had already begun to neatly stack Alicia's books back into boxes. He felt a pang of guilt for leaving her with the cleanup, but something was pulling him toward Amy, toward answers to questions he hadn't even formed yet. The door closed behind him as he stepped out into the misty Mornington morning, the yearbook clutched tightly against his chest. Frank drove through the winding coastal roads of Mornington, following Elaine's directions to the camper park where Amy Davidson now lived. The journey took about 20 minutes, leading him away from the town center to a modest area where several camper vans were parked along a strip overlooking a wooded area. He parked his car and looked around, trying to identify which might be Amy's. There were about a dozen campers of various sizes and conditions. Some looked permanent with small gardens planted beside them and outdoor furniture set up. Frank approached a man who was washing the windows of his RV. Excuse me, I'm looking for Amy Davidson. Do you know which camper is hers? The man pointed toward a blue and white camper at the far end of the lot. That's Amy's place. Nice lady. Keeps to herself mostly. Frank thanked him and walked over to the indicated camper. It was modest but well-maintained with a small potted plant by the door. He took a deep breath and knocked. After a moment, the door opened. A woman in her early 40s stood there, her blonde hair now streaked with strands of gray, her face showing the subtle lines of middle-age. She looked at Frank with polite confusion, no recognition in her eyes. Can I help you? She asked. Frank realized with a start that they wouldn't recognize each other. The last time they'd seen each other, Amy had been a teenager and he had been 22 years younger. Amy, it's Frank Sanders, Alicia's father. Her eyes widened in surprise, then filled with a mixture of emotions. Recognition, sadness, warmth. Mr. Sanders. Oh my goodness. I please come in. She stepped back, opening the door wider. Frank climbed the 2 small steps into the compact but cozy living space. The camper was neat and decorated with personal touches, photographs, small plants, colorful pillows. Please sit down. Would you like some coffee? Amy gestured to a small dining area. Coffee would be nice. Thank you, Frank said, settling onto the bench seat. As Amy prepared the coffee, Frank noticed how her movements were deliberate, almost cautious, as if she was giving herself time to process this unexpected visit. "What brings you here after all these years?" she asked, placing a steaming mug in front of him before sitting down across the table. Frank pulled out the yearbook he'd brought with him. "I found this today while cleaning out Alicia's room. I realized I'd never actually looked through it before." Amy's eyes fixed on the book. "I remember this," she said softly, reaching out to touch the cover. Frank opened it to Alicia's profile page and pointed to the note about returning the book. "I was curious about this book," she mentioned. "Did you ever return it to her?" Amy's expression softened into a sad smile. "No, I didn't. I was such a forgetful girl back then, and Alicia knew it. She always teased me about it." She got up and moved to a cabinet beneath her bed. After rummaging for a moment, she pulled out a worn copy of The Secret Garden, Illustrated Classic Edition. "I kept forgetting to return it, and then after she disappeared, I couldn't part with it. It's the last thing I have from her." Amy held the book carefully as if it were made of delicate glass. "Would you mind terribly if I kept it? It's become very precious to me over the years." Frank nodded, understanding completely. "Of course, you can keep it." He took the book when Amy handed it to him, opening it gently. The pages were yellowed with age, but the illustrations were still vibrant. As he flipped through, he paused at a page that had been used as a bookmark. It looked like a torn page from a youth fashion magazine. Frank unfolded the page to reveal a photo shoot featuring teenage models. A young boy in stylish clothes caught his eye. Something about him seemed familiar. "Who's this?" he asked, pointing to the model. Amy leaned forward to look. "That's Jason Murray, he was in our class." Frank turned back to the yearbook and found Jason's photo near Alicia's. "I remember now. He was quite talented to be modeling at that age. He still models occasionally from what I hear. He has his own fashion line now," Amy said. Frank looked up. "You know, Elaine once mentioned that you were dating Jason back then. I didn't pay much attention at the time." Amy's expression changed immediately. "That's not true at all. I never dated Jason. In fact, I never even liked him. He was actually close with Alicia for a while." This caught Frank by surprise. "Alicia? She and Elaine never mentioned anything about Jason to me. It was during our junior year in grade 11, about a year before graduation," Amy explained. "Jason seemed to have a crush on Alicia for a few months, but it didn't last long. Once we realized what kind of person he really was, we both stayed away from him. Alicia never mentioned him again." Amy paused, seeming to recall something. "Actually, now that I think about it, I did see them talking a few times during senior year. They seemed close, which was strange because we'd agreed he was bad news. Alicia even asked me some odd questions about him." "What kind of questions?" Frank asked. His interest piqued. "She asked if I thought someone like Jason just needed help to change, if maybe he wasn't as bad as we thought. She even asked me to drive past his house once because she wanted to see where he lived. I thought it was weird at the time, but Alicia always had such a soft heart. She wanted to see the good in everyone." Franked. "Did the police know about this when they investigated her disappearance?" "Yes, I told them," Amy confirmed. "They questioned everyone in our class, including Jason. But by that time, Alicia was dating Brandon Knox. He was their main suspect at first." Frank nodded. "I remember Brandon. He used to come to the house to pick her up. We were suspicious of him, too, but he had a solid alibi for when she disappeared." "Do you know what happened to Brandon?" Frank asked. "Last I heard, he left town not long after Alicia vanished. The scrutiny was too much for him, I think." Frank's mind was racing. "And Jason? What about him?" "I'm not sure about any relationship between them," Amy said. Alicia rarely showed any interest in him other than those few curious questions. Frank glanced once more at Jason's photo in the magazine. Why would Alicia have used his page as a bookmark? And the fact that she'd been close to him without either Frank or Elaine knowing that felt important. He brought it up to Amy and she said, it was from Alicia's favorite magazine. I hated him so much that Alicia tore out the page with his face on it. She just folded it and said there was nothing better for it than to be used as a bookmark. Frank thought for a moment, then nodded. Do you know where Jason is now? He asked. Amy picked up her phone and scrolled through some messages. Actually, our high school alumni group just had a reunion last weekend at Jason's house. I didn't go, but they shared his address in the group chat. She showed Frank the message. Would you mind sending me that address? Frank asked, pulling out his phone. They exchanged numbers, and Amy forwarded him the information. Do you think Jason might be involved somehow? Amy asked hesitantly. I don't know, Frank admitted. But I'd like the police to know about his relationship with Alicia, however brief it was. The fact that neither Elaine nor I knew about it makes me curious. When Alicia started dating Brandon, it was completely open and transparent. Frank stood up, thanking Amy for her time and the information. As he prepared to leave, Amy touched his arm. Please tell Elaine I said hello, she said. And thank you for letting me keep the book. It means more to me than you know. Frank nodded, the yearbook tucked under his arm as he stepped back out into the afternoon light, his mind filled with new questions about his daughter's life and her disappearance. Frank sat in his car, the yearbook resting on the passenger seat beside him. His mind was racing with the new information Amy had shared. The revelation that Alicia had been close to Jason Murray, however briefly, was unsettling, not because of Jason himself, but because Frank and Elaine had never known about it. He took out his phone and dialed Detective Ron Keller, the officer who had been assigned to Alicia's case all those years ago. Frank knew the detective had retired now, but still lived in town. The call went to voicemail, not surprising for a Sunday afternoon. Frank stared at his phone, then at the address Amy had sent him. He should go home to Elaine. He knew that he had promised her they would close this chapter of their lives today. But something about what Amy had said, and the bookmark kept gnawing at him. Alicia's curiosity about Jason's home, her questions about whether he could change. Just a quick drive by, he muttered to himself, starting the car. Just to see where it is. 20 minutes later, Frank found himself in one of Mornington's more affluent neighborhoods. Large houses with manicured lawns lined the quiet streets, a stark contrast to the modest home where he and Elaine had raised Alicia. He located Jason's address, a sprawling two-story house with a circular driveway and professional landscaping. The property was significantly larger than the surrounding homes, speaking to Jason's success since high school. Frank parked his car across the street at a distance, observing the house. The front gate was open, and as he watched, a man emerged from the front door, accompanied by a young woman. Even from this distance, Frank could recognize an older version of the boy from the yearbook. Jason Murray, now in his early 40s, still handsome, with the confidence of someone accustomed to success. Jason walked the woman to her car, kissed her cheek, and waved as she drove away. As he turned to go back inside, his gaze drifted across the street and landed on Frank's car. Frank realized too late that his car windows didn't have tinting, making him clearly visible. Jason's posture changed, becoming alert and suspicious. Frank decided there was no point in hiding now. He turned off the engine, got out of the car, and approached the gate. "Good afternoon," Frank called out, trying to sound casual. "Jason Murray, isn't it?" Jason didn't return the friendly greeting. "Who are you and why are you watching my house?" he demanded, his tone instantly hostile. "Are you paparazzi?" "A reporter." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude," Frank said, stopping at a respectful distance. "My name is Frank Sanders. I'm Alicia Sanders' father. She was in your graduating class and went missing 22 years ago." Jason's expression changed instantly, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" Frank was taken back by the coldness of Jason's response. "I heard there was a class reunion here last weekend. I'm just trying to gather some information about my daughter. I was told you might have been close to her at one point." "Who told you that?" "Amy." Jason's voice was sharp. "She didn't even come to the reunion." Frank tried to keep his tone calm. "I'm not looking for trouble, just some answers. It's been 22 years and we still don't know what happened to Alicia." "Why are you asking me?" Jason replied defensively. "I was never even Alicia's boyfriend. I barely knew her and was never attracted to her. I told the police that back then, and I don't appreciate being questioned about it again." Frank was confused by the intensity of Jason's reaction. "I never suggested you were her boyfriend. I just heard you were close at one point. If we ever talked at school, it was probably because I borrowed money or needed help with homework," Jason said dismissively. "I always returned what I borrowed. There was never a problem between us. I told the police everything back then." Despite his casual words, Frank noticed how Jason's body language had become increasingly tense. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting around as if checking whether anyone else was watching. "I don't understand why you're suddenly showing up at my house asking these questions," Jason continued. "I have a reputation to maintain now. I don't want any reporter or the public seeing us together and spreading rumors." Before Frank could respond, Jason turned and strode back toward his house. "You should leave," he called over his shoulder. "I have nothing else to say about Alicia Sanders." Frank stood there, stunned by the encounter. Jason's reaction seemed disproportionate to his simple questions. Why would a successful businessman be so defensive about a brief high school friendship from over 2 decades ago? As Jason disappeared inside his house, Frank slowly walked back to his car. His hands were shaking slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. He felt foolish and ashamed for coming here, for pushing when Elaine had asked him to let go. "What was I thinking?" he muttered to himself. "I promised Elaine we'd close this chapter today, not reopen old wounds." He started the car, casting one last glance at Jason's house before driving away. If Elaine knew he had come here instead of helping with the cleanup at home, she would be hurt and angry. Frank had allowed himself to be pulled back into the vortex of questions and possibilities that had consumed the first years after Alicia's disappearance. As he drove back toward town, Frank tried to convince himself to let it go. Jason's hostile reaction was probably nothing more than annoyance at having his Sunday afternoon interrupted by a reminder of a tragic event from his youth. Anyone would be uncomfortable being spontaneously questioned about a missing person case after so many years. Yet something about Jason's defensiveness nagged at Frank. It seemed excessive, almost panicked. Was it just the surprise of being confronted unexpectedly? Or was there something more? Frank shook his head, forcing himself to focus on the road. He had promised Elaine they would move forward today. He needed to honor that promise and stop chasing ghosts from the past. As Frank drove back into town, his mind kept replaying the strange encounter with Jason Murray. The man's hostility had been unexpected and unsettling. Frank knew he should go home to Elaine, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled onto something important. Almost without conscious decision, he found himself turning toward Mornington Memorial Funeral Home. If he and Elaine were truly going to close this chapter of their lives, perhaps it was time to consider a formal memorial service for Alicia, even without a body to bury. The funeral home was quiet when Frank entered. A gentle-faced receptionist greeted him and after hearing his purpose, provided him with brochures detailing services and prices. Frank thanked her and brochures in hand, walked back to his car. As he opened his car door, a flicker of movement across the street caught his eye. Jason Murray was heading into a hardware store. Then, just moments later, he reappeared at the cashier holding a shovel and a small wooden box. Frank froze. His gaze locked on Jason as he loaded the items into his car. Frank ducked into his own car, not wanting to be seen. Through his rear-view mirror, he watched as Jason walked to the floral shop next door to the hardware store. A few minutes later, Jason emerged carrying a bouquet of white hyacinths. White hyacinths, Alicia's favorite flowers. A chill ran down Frank's spine. It could be a coincidence, of course. Plenty of people liked white hyacinths, but combined with Jason's earlier behavior and the shovel. Frank's heart pounded as Jason placed the flowers in his car and drove away. Without allowing himself to think about the consequences, Frank started his car and followed at a safe distance. Jason drove through town and then took the coastal road leading toward Whitlow Cliff, an area known